Netwealth Investments Limited is licensed to provide general advice. Our podcasts are not tailored to any one financial situation and may contain views of our presenters which may not align with Netwealth's. The guest's organisation and Netwealth have an arrangement for their financial products to be available for investment through the Netwealth platforms, and Netwealth may receive fees from the guest. More information about Netwealth can be found on our website, including our financial services guide and disclosure documents. Please seek professional advice before acting.
Hi, and welcome to Between Meetings with Matt Heine. In this podcast series, Netwealth's CEO and Managing Director chats to industry leaders and innovators with local and global expertise. They discuss the latest technologies, business models, and demographic changes, as well as leadership lessons and trends that are impacting financial services. We hope you enjoy their unique insights.
In this episode, I switched seats to be interviewed on the Ensombl AdviceTech podcast about how technology is enabling advisors to differentiate their offering and build their client value proposition. During the conversation, we dive into the efficiencies of managed accounts during turbulent markets, integrating ESG into the offer, cybersecurity, and of course, using AI to manage back office administration. I hope you enjoy the episode.
The Ensombl podcast is intended for professional financial advisors. This content is created in partnership with our sponsor, Netwealth Investments Limited, ABN 85090 569 109, AFSL 230975, and is limited to publicly available information. Before acting on any general advice, you should consider whether appropriate and obtain financial advice from a qualified financial advisor. Ensombl does not hold an AFS license and does not provide any financial advice or services or endorse any general advice. If a PDS or IM exists, you should obtain a copy and review it thoroughly before making a decision.
AdviceTech. As if it wasn't enough to be across TMDs, Alpha, Beta, Rule of 72, and all the other nuances of financial advice. Now, advisors are expected to be across all the technology options too, and there's so many of them. But never fear, Peita D is here. Join me each week on a journey of discovery through the software and apps on offer for advisors and advice businesses. So let's dive in, fellow advice explorers.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by Netwealth. Imagine a world of investment choice that goes beyond borders. Open up a world of investment opportunity with Netwealth, where you can access local and international securities, as well as bonds and foreign currency options for wholesale clients. Offer your clients flexibility, transparency, and efficiency with managed accounts, managed funds, and access to non-custodial assets. A world of investment awaits you. Discover it at netwealth.com.au/woo.
Hello and welcome to the Ensombl AdviceTech podcast. I'm Peita Diamantidis, and this week we're kicking off the first of our new AdviceTech feature episodes, where we sort of discuss broader ideas and issues the industry is facing when it comes to tech. But I promise next week we'll return to our regular programming and dive into a specific app. Now, today's feature topic is tech and the client value proposition. And who better to have the first of these conversations with than the self-confessed tech geek from Netwealth and a particularly stylish wearer of Silicon Valley chic. It's Matt Heine. Woo!
That's very generous of you, Peita. Good to be back.
It is. I'm so glad to have you back. I mean, you're my first returning guest for the AdviceTech podcast. And I think you were back all the way in episode 5.
Feels like a long time ago.
We're in the 40s now. It does feel like a long time ago. I feel like I've aged since then. But before we dive in, as we always start, and the listener knows this, we normally would dive into things like emoji use and smartphone apps and all that sort of stuff, which we've done with you before. So as a returning guest, the first thing I'd love to know, to learn a bit more about your tech use, is if someone came to you and offered to build the perfect AI buddy just for you, what task would you want it to magically do for you?
That's a very good question. I'm actually a bit disappointed that you didn't ask me the same question you did last time. So I was a bit embarrassed by my response. It was very pedestrian, and had I had more time, I'm sure I could have come up with something much better. So what would I have as my perfect AI buddy? So probably, like many listeners, I'm already using ChatGPT for a whole range of things, including writing bedtime stories for my kids at night, which if you haven't done it is great fun because depending on what time of the night it is, you can choose a 500-word story or a 1,000-word story. And basically you get them to pick the key ingredients. So the last one I wrote was my son wanted to turn into a lizard and fight evil with his best friend Evander. And what was amazing about it was it actually not only wrote a beautiful story, but then it finished the story with the moral of the story, which was about despite diversity and facing into adversity, when you're supported by good friends and family, you can fight whatever you want. So that was pretty amazing. So if you haven't tried it, I highly recommend it. But
That's incredible.
What would I want as an AI buddy? Probably along a similar theme. If I could have an app or some technology that translated what I asked my children into something that they actually listened to, that would be amazing.
Like the intuitive translation, right? So it's not language to foreign language. It's intent to something that they're interested into. Like maybe it makes it into a rap song or something, so that at least they're listening as you ask them to do things.
Exactly right. So if you come up with anything, please let me know.
Well, but I'm definitely stealing the ChatGPT use. That's fantastic for a bedtime story, because there's nothing worse than those of us that aren't that creative trying to come up with a random bedtime story. It's just not pretty. It's when you start to fail as an adult, I've discovered, when you try to do those things.
And the best bit is, which I haven't done yet, but it's next on my list, is you can then use DALL-E to actually illustrate the story that you've just written on ChatGPT. So, hours of entertainment.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, everybody's running away. They've all paused now, and they're all going to run away and do it now. So now my second question actually is sort of taking a look back, I guess. Look, not all new tech is good tech, right? Not all new tech makes things better. Is there anything that you love the analog version of better than the new tech?
Can I just go with life?
Yeah. Living. Yeah.
Living. Life was a lot easier without a mobile phone and a laptop.
It sort of is. It's why we all love holidays when you can just lose, you have no contact, there's no Wi-Fi. I love it when they say that. We don't have any internet.
It's actually my favorite thing to do is to lock myself away without a phone, up in the hills for 5 days, with no technology, no newspapers. You come out feeling incredibly refreshed. It's liberating.
It is. I do the same. I pretend that planes don't have Wi-Fi anymore. I just pretend like I can't do any of that. Just relax.
I get too
Alrighty. Right. Let's dive into client value propositions and tech, shall we? So advisors like me, we often focus on tech, and we focus on that sort of operational efficiency, the productivity sort of focus, which is natural. I mean, that's where technology's always started. But there's loads going on in the client value proposition space. This can be whether it's investment philosophy or even the customer experience. So, let's start with the investment philosophy and offer. We're doing, a lot of discussions about that on the Ensombl platform. Advisors are really going much further in terms of what they're trying to deliver. What are you guys seeing in terms of clients' needs or demands from firms and what they want, in terms of how we need to enhance or sort of reconsider our investment philosophies? Yeah,
so I think this is a trend that's been playing out for some time now. So it started in the US probably 10 years ago, and we've seen movement in the Australian market, but it really has accelerated, I think, throughout COVID with market volatility and the need to be doing more regulation overload, et cetera. And I guess rather than getting into a discussion necessarily now about different legal structures, SMAs, MDAs, if we sort of talk broadly about automated investment solutions, so finding ways to scale your investment philosophy is really what advisors are looking for.
Yeah.
And really that means that if they can find a way to, first of all, articulate and describe what their value proposition is around their investment philosophy, and then implement it as efficiently as possible, it means that they can start to really focus on delivering great service and focus on that strategic piece, which is where we all know advisors can add the most value. So we really have seen managed accounts particularly grow exponentially over the last 3 years. And I've just done a roadshow around Australia talking about some of the things that we're up to. And one of the interesting statistics was that if you look at our managed account in 2019, so we'd been in the market for 5 years, we were one of the sort of the pioneers, if you like, in the managed account space. But it had taken some time to get traction. And so in 2019, the size of our managed account was $2.5 billion. Now, if you fast forward to today, it's in excess of $13 billion, or 3 and a bit years later, which just shows you that exponential growth throughout that period. And what's really interesting is that within that managed account, we've got a very, very diverse user base. So we've got everything from smaller practices dealing with accumulators, all the way through to very high net worth individuals, ultra high net worth individuals looking at customized portfolios and everything in between. So from our perspective, it's not a product. It's just a really efficient way to actually implement a firm's investment philosophy. And that might be that they believe in passive management with strategic asset allocation, or it might be that they actually believe equities can add more value in the Australian market, but they want indexes and managed funds for overseas. So the tools and the capability of managed accounts, and that could be through an SMA or an MDA, are very far superior to what they were 5 years ago and certainly 10 years ago, and really allow firms to differentiate their offer through their investment philosophy, but also make sure that they're treating all their clients equally and that everyone's got the same access to their best ideas at the same time.
And it's an interesting nuance there, because I think a lot of the discussion around managed accounts and all of the permutations thereof can be a focus on the investment insights and all of that expertise, when that's only half of the tale. The other half is this ease of implementation. So, and when I say that, I mean having something very personalized for that client and then being able to implement that easily. That was always something that's been so clunky historically.
Yeah, and for any advisor that's had to try and run the business, service clients, rebalance portfolios over the last 3 years during extreme volatility, it's actually not possible, and to deliver a great outcome to the client. So what we saw was incredible outcomes, because investment committees were able to look at overnight data. They were able to convene in the morning, make a decision, and literally implement ideas that day for all of their clients. And that meant that as markets fell, they were able to de-risk portfolios by removing assets. And as opportunities presented, they were able to take those opportunities as they arose. So people were able to actually come out of it in a far better circumstance than they would have had they not been in a managed account. And then you see really interesting combinations of it. We've got people using MDA licenses and investing into SMAs for certain asset classes. And certainly the anecdotal evidence there is that they've suggested that they've added maybe up to 3% alpha, because the first time they've been able to take the ideas that they've had from the investment committee and implement them in a reasonable time, rather than taking 1, 2, 3 months maybe to get through all of their clients.
And certainly, this has got to play a part when you start talking about ESG, and I hate that acronym because it's covering such a broad range of things. It's a bit just like calling it markets, but anyway, it's whatever the lens that client has. Well, what's important to them. It can't just be, well, there's this fund. It just can't just be that, because everybody's view on what is the highest priority for them, what's the thing that's icky for them. Really, that's a lot of what they're looking for. Yeah, I really am not comfortable with that industry. Those sort of things. I think it's going to be a challenge just to have a fund that handles that. I think it is going to end up being more and more personalized, because the information is going to get better too. There's, tools starting to come out that don't just assess the underlying investments. They're going to assess the fund manager. They're also going to assess the platform. Like, all of us are going to start to be assessed on our sustainability targets, so the information is going to be there. We're going to need a way to be able to pull that together and act on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that your comment on the platform is absolutely spot on. We are regularly being asked by clients to see what our CSR strategy is, because they want to make sure that it's not just the investments that they're investing into that are doing the right thing, but the providers in the middle are also having an impact and contributing back to the community. So that is very much front and centre. ESG is probably a topic for another day. I could spend hours talking about it. I think there is a long way to go. I think that, unfortunately, the data isn't necessarily there to support the right outcomes. There's a lot of people working on it to make sure that we get more relevant outcomes, but to rely purely on, some of the current providers is a mistake. But look, it's really good. I think it's heading in the right direction, and we know it's important to clients.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think people just are going to expect more and more ability to personalise, but also gain access. They're going to want to be able to gain access to alternatives and other things that otherwise used to sort of be outside the remit of an advisor, right? And so that's just going to be the expectation of the public. And our tools are going to have to reflect that.
Yeah, and we're seeing that. We get a lot of pressure or feedback or whatever you want to call it from our clients, which we love because feedback is a gift. But around the platform or the administration services that they're using shouldn't constrain the investment choice or the investment requirements of their client base. And so we've spent a lot of time over the years looking at how do we make sure we support more and more of those asset classes or asset types that have been traditionally very hard to get hold of. And we're seeing some really interesting combinations that are very differentiated, using all of the different tools in different ways.
Yeah, and it's look, I'm actually a bit curious then about. We spoke about AI very briefly up the front, but are you either you yourselves or what you're seeing out there, is AI being used more in any of the back office sort of admin perspective for platforms or investments? Is that coming up more and more?
Look, there's a lot of people talking about it. Okay. I think one of the interesting observations. There's quite a few articles on this, bit of a segue, but Apple's just released their new spatial computing headset.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you'll notice in that launch, they didn't mention AI, virtual reality once.
No.
They were very clear that has got a bit of a stigma attached to it now. And so they're seeking to actually recreate and redefine what it is that they do without sort of getting sucked into all of the buzzwords. And there is a tendency for firms and I think companies to throw around AI when it might be basic data analytics or machine learning as opposed to true AI. But at the other end, there are some obviously very incredible businesses being built on true AI. And obviously we've talked about ChatGPT and some of the outcomes that's producing. So I think when you think about AI moving forward, so there's a lot of companies that we're all already interacting with on a daily basis that we use to run our businesses that are using AI. I'm incredibly excited about where Microsoft is heading with their Copilot products and how that's going to be just embedded into everything that we use day to day. And that's really not that far off. Obviously, Apple, Google all have very strong AI capabilities and machine learning capabilities behind them. So moving forward, as we pick technology, it's important to make sure that we are looking forward 2 or 3 years and to understand what their AI or machine learning roadmap is, as opposed to perhaps taking it that it does do it today or it doesn't do it today. But we're probably as guilty as others, but we're doing some really interesting things internally from an operational perspective that help us identify documents, automatically index documents. We're using the technology to identify redact TFNs as an example. So I think the tools and the technology is certainly accelerating, and we're going to see it just populated into our day-to-day life.
Yeah. And I guess, I'm with you with Microsoft. I wondered if they were just going to be too slow. Like this could be one of those moments where they, there's almost the Kodak moment where they just lose a market because they're too slow to respond. But they've really sort of taken that leap. They really look, and it's perfect. All of those tools we use every day, they're perfect applications for AI. There's so many repetitive things we do in them. So I love that they're actually taking that leap and going down that path. I'm curious.
I think Microsoft's the company to watch. And if I know it was one of your questions, people often ask who are the leaders that I most admire. Satya has got to be up there. He's turned around a huge business in a very short period of time. And
a huge elephant, right?
A huge elephant, and doing some of the most incredible things. So kudos to them.
Yeah, it is exciting. And I guess, for those of us that, you will have a deep understanding of the difference between all these things, but for those of us that don't, AI sort of falls into a category a bit like blockchain for me, in that it's like computer power. Like it's like, how can you do more with less? Are you seeing more and more things sort of taking advantage of blockchain as a tool as well in investing?
No.
No, they're not going down that path yet. They're not sort of taking advantage of what's out there.
No, look, I think blockchain as a technology is potentially very powerful, and where we haven't seen evidence of, I guess, blockchain in this industry is really the business models that sit on top of it.
Right.
There's been different blockchain projects within their industry. One of them's just closed down, which was around fee disclosures and fee consent. And the reality is that there's really good databases and good technology that can solve a lot of the problems that people have tried to solve with blockchain and didn't necessarily need to.
Okay.
So I'm not saying it's dead. I think it's just really got a long way to go before we starting to see real practical applications. I know there's people that are looking at building new exchanges. Obviously, chess has not been a great example of a use case of blockchain. Probably the worst use case. And that's going to set the industry back because people will be naturally gun shy now. So I think it's a good technology. It's really about the business case and the business layer that I haven't seen anything amazing yet.
Yeah. And I guess, you mentioned security, and it's clearly front of mind for all of us now. And I only imagine you guys are well down that path as well. Are you seeing, are we evolving fast enough with that, do you think? Do you think the industry is keeping up with what it needs to be doing on the sort of cyber risk and protecting our clients, or do you feel like we're playing catch up a little?
Oh, I think it's a long way to go. Cyber is hard. The attacks are incredibly sophisticated. The number of attacks, the sophistication of the attacks is incrementally huge since the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. We're seeing a lot more activity. And obviously, we're seeing a lot more companies suffering as a result of cyber attacks. So it's something that people just have to be diligent about. You can't hope that it's not going to impact you. As an industry, we have more data than pretty much any other industry, including medical, and we need to do everything we can to protect that information. So if you're not thinking about it, don't have external professionals helping you, it's something that you really need to be looking at. There's a couple of things on cyber. One is that people will almost always be the weakest link, and it's, we can do training every day, but ultimately it's someone that clicks on a link that they shouldn't have, or opens an email or an attachment that looked suspicious but they hadn't picked up, that will cause issues. And equally, we do see a lot of attempted client frauds where it's the classic: clients overseas gets their Gmail account hacked, starts asking the advisor and us for money, and before you know it, there's lots of conversations happening left, right, and centre. And luckily we have a lot of processes in place to stop those frauds, but you need to be diligent and aware.
And it is one of those things we talk about in our practice where the best thing at any point is a conversation. Like actually communicating with a person, not using stuff. Exactly. Just talk to them, because that can circumvent so many of these things if somebody just spoken to somebody else.
Absolutely.
And catch that.
Imagine a world where you can build a complete picture of your client's financial wealth. With Netwealth, you can track and monitor external bank accounts alongside residential and investment properties. Join the dots with Xeppo, a client data warehouse that connects your CRM and other tech systems with Netwealth. Make it make sense. Discover a world of client data at netwealth.com.au/woo.
If we then take a look at tech in the environment of the client experience, which is probably something that all of us have begun to consider more, but we're probably in earlier stages. We've still got some work to do along that line. We've still historically had our client experience almost defined by legislation, and that's natural. But I think with everything going on, and I actually think last time you and I spoke, there were some announcements that dropped on the day that we spoke. And just recently, we've also had QAR come out and some things said that are going to be changing. So it's quite good timing. Technology and the way that it can improve or enhance the client experience is a real thing now, particularly with millennials now being a huge portion of the client prospects we're all going to be dealing with going forward.
Yeah, I often joke or comment that the biggest innovation in financial services in the last 2 decades has been digital signatures. But I think, unfortunately, there is actually a lot of truth to it. And as an industry, we need to get much better. And I think your comment before about the number of millennials, it's probably not the point that's relevant. And all of our research would suggest that if we use client portals as an example and mobile client portals, when we've researched and done our advisable Australian reports, the needs and wants and desires of our high net worth established affluent and an emerging affluent or millennial with money are almost identical.
Yeah, okay.
They all want to be able to look at their whole of wealth on a mobile. They want to be able to interact with their advisor via chat or some other social media channel or contact.
Yeah.
They want to be able to have an idea of what's going on in their budgeting world. So all of these things that have been sort of, I guess, pushed down the line as, that's something millennials want. It's just not true. And COVID really did accelerate that. And if we all think about our own lives, going back to our conversation about life being complex, everyone lives on their mobiles these days. And so the more that we can interact and create context to those interactions, the deeper those client relationships are going to be over time. And there's lots of different ways that can be done, but we really do need to start investing in that digital front-end experience, not only because we know that advice firms that have done it, it's only about 30% of the industry so far, but they're seeing much higher levels of satisfaction. They're seeing much higher levels of client engagement. And then if you combine that with things like the consistency and reliability of a managed account, all of these things are generating referrals and helping them grow their business. And ultimately, that is as important as making sure that we can produce SOAs and those things as efficiently as possible. So it is super important. The firms that do it really well are seeing the benefits, and the ones that continue to underinvest in this area, I think we'll find in 2 or 3 years that they've lost a lot of ground.
And it's an interesting thing that when you look back at the way we approach these things, say it was, there would be face-to-face and then some people were doing video meetings and using more email, all those sort of things is the danger is that we see these new things as a secondary option. It's like, we'll have it, but it's just a secondary consideration. And so we treat it accordingly instead of what's probably the case is we almost need to shift to that as the primary. Like we almost need to behave as if those new things, whether it's via the portal, chat, whatever it is actually the primary way. And hey, we'll we'll do it the other way if you need us to, but this is the way we engage, because it's a mentality, isn't it? Like it's a complete change in the way your team do things, the default in the way they send things to clients. All of that's got to change. We have to sort of adjust all our workflows and processes accordingly.
Yeah. I see a world probably in 2 or 3 years where email is not used as a tool for communicating sensitive information, and it shouldn't be. It's not the right tool. So the more that we can, work collectively as an industry and with our providers to have document vaults and secure signing, secure chats, all those sort of things, the better. And it's a better client experience. So, and I think you touched on a really important point, which is don't think about it as a separate bit of technology. It has to be part of your process. Otherwise, it will fail. And so think about it from the client perspective. Think about how that integrates with what you need to do from an internal perspective, and make sure that it's actually a benefit to both parties.
And it is a change management exercise, isn't it? I'm sure you guys have seen that for anything you roll out, right? You're going to have to train clients to make the change, even if they're happy to do it. And you're probably going to have to almost nudge them to it, even if they accidentally send you something via email. It's like, fantastic, but can you just try it again via the portal instead of doing it all for them? I think we try and make things easier, but that's okay, I'll handle it. But you're not creating change. You're not giving them the new habit so that they're going to go, say, via the portal every time.
Well, and I've seen some great practices adopting really interesting ways to embed that change management. So when they first come in for their sort of implementation meeting, they'll actually sit down with the client, help them get the app set up, make sure that the facial recognition is working so they don't have to worry about their PIN numbers and passwords. Yeah. But the other extreme, and I think this is a great idea, is they get their more elderly clients for a lunch and learn. So if you come in for lunchtime, we'll get around. It's a little bit like the Apple sessions that they run in the Apple stores, and they get them all around a table. They have a little bit of a laugh about how hopeless they all are. But through that, they're showing them and they're working together with other clients to say, it's not actually that hard. And they get direct feedback as well on the sort of things that their clients said, wouldn't it be cool if you could do this, this, and this? So it's a great way to engage with your clients and have a bit of fun as well.
And they had Apple had a huge take up from that the boomer sort of generation because of that. Some of them were going in every week for another session, and nobody else was offering that. You couldn't buy a normal PC and get that service, so it is a way to differentiate yourself. And I guess I'm curious about your take on businesses like, say, Apple and Amazon. I mean, I know I'm an Amazon Prime member, and my complete expectation now is if I order something, it gets here tomorrow. Like it's just it's a given.
I'm still shocked by it though. I ordered some things for my computer. I think it was I lost my charger for my Garmin watch and needed a USB connector for something or other. And it arrived either that afternoon or the next day. And it still shocks me, but it's also set that new expectation.
Hasn't it? And what do we there's so many examples of that. And like you say, in our industry, we're so excited that we're doing e-signatures. I guess I'm curious what you think the leaps need to be, because part of maybe the problem in our industry is we do these iterative developments. We're not sort of making these quantum leaps of what's the next thing. For example, should we be using e-signature at all, or should be there some other two-factor or some other authentication method that we should just be moving to instead of? I'm interested in where we might be sort of almost holding ourselves back a little with some of those decisions.
Yeah, I think unfortunately with digital signatures, often it's the use case that will dictate the signature method. Yep. So there are still, we do digital signatures as an example for pretty much every form. There's still certain ones that legally we have to have a wet signature for. But increasingly, as we move down the sort of integrated mobile path, if we can avoid a digital signature and just have a accept reject button, that's the way we'll go. A signature is sort of an interim step because it was convenient and everyone knew how it worked. But the reality is all we're wanting is to get the go ahead on a piece of work.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what else do you think, you guys have spent a lot of time on, even your portal for Netwealth, and, what people are using. I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of the users and what they focus on a lot. Like, what are you seeing them use, and what are some things that you've put in there that nobody takes a look at? You thought, that was all that effort and then nobody's really utilized it. Was there any surprises?
So I know advisors are certainly pushing people towards the mobile app, particularly where it's branded and they've got a bit of ownership. So sort of our strategy, that sort of going down the product side, was to make sure it was a standalone bit of tech that people could use regardless of whether they had a Netwealth account or not. That was and still is very, very important to us. So it's sort of agnostic to what we're doing on the other side. But the reason they've done that is, again, it avoids all the issues with logins and passwords because it's a matter of holding it up to your face. The one feature that's had the biggest take-up is actually the integrated property feeds. So we launched the product whilst it wasn't quite as big adoption as the ChatGPT app. I think we had 900 users over the first couple of weeks, add 1,700 properties, so on average 2 properties, which really just reflects Australia's love of property. And the important things to them, when we debated this a lot internally, was, they wanted to see a picture of the house because they've got an emotional attachment to it. And whether they agreed with the valuations or not, they could go in there and put in a owner valuation if they disagreed with the one that was coming from Domain. So property, we thought it was an important part of the total wealth picture because it's such a big part of it. But the adoption since then has been huge. It's the one that people get most excited about. And I think banking is certainly heading in that direction where people just want to be able to do everything in the one environment and not have to move between multiple applications.
Yeah, and it's because I get why for the institution, I get, it's your bank, whatever your bank is, and that's our app and that's how you log in. But like you say, for the client, it's like, but I don't care. I want to just see all my stuff, right? Why can't that be in one place?
And make it easy. Actually, I've got the experience, and I won't name the accounting for software. It's one of 2, but their view was that rather than building integrated apps themselves, they would just have a huge exchange of different services. The problem for that is it worked really well for the accountant, but as a client, I had to go in, load up a receipt in one app. I then had to approve it in another app, and then if I wanted to see if that had been processed, I had to open up the accounting app. And so I just didn't do it. I went back to sending emails because it was much easier. So again, got to think about it from the client's perspective and solve the problem for them rather than what makes it easy for the advisor.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that I'll be curious about as we go further down, things like the actual apps on clients' phones is what else makes it easier? Is it something that'll nudge them when they need to do something? Is it like, what are the features that maybe we don't see as important, but will add immense value to them? And I guess that only comes out of asking, right? It only comes out of understanding where their biggest blockages are or interests. Like you say with the property, of all the things that we could have in there, really? Like, really? But everybody's fascinated. And particularly when the market's going nuts and a bit berserk, then they're all curious about that. It makes sense.
That's the one thing every Australian will have an opinion on.
Yes, exactly. Exactly right. Is there any other, in terms of then it's not so much productivity, but, the customer experience, are you seeing any more things that could be exciting about, say the next best thing for, the advisor to work on for a client or anything like that you're starting to see that technology can add some real value to?
So there's a couple of things. And again, I talk about what we're doing, and I do that because it's what we actually believe in. So we do a lot of the research, and we think where we see the industry going. So I think customizable reporting is huge, and we're spending a lot of money in that space to make sure that an advisor can basically, and we're calling it the Advice Illustrator, they can tell the story using our data and imagery to explain it, the strategy, how they want to the client, and more importantly, how the client will understand it. Yeah. So it could be that you've got a new client that's not overly literate, that ultimately just wants to see what's my balance over time, what's my asset allocation if the advisors just started having that discussion, and maybe what's money in, money out, versus someone that's very sophisticated that's going to want all the bells and whistles and line-by-line asset performance report and benchmarking and contribution analysis and some of those things. So I think being able to tell the story the way that you want to tell the story to the clients that you want to tell it is going to be really important. So that's certainly coming. And then if you sort of think about AI, I was fortunate to do a live interview with the head of data and analytics and AI for Morgan Stanley in the US, where they have 16,000 advisors that they're building solutions for. And they're doing some really cool stuff, and have got a arrangement actually with OpenAI, which is the engine that sits behind ChatGPT. And so they're training. So they've had next best actions for some time. So when an advisor logs into their desktop, and their whole theory is that it's man with machine versus man without. And so they're not trying to replace the advisors. They're trying to make them as efficient as possible and put them in a position where they can add the most value. And so next best actions is when they first log in the morning, it basically says this has occurred overnight. These portfolios might be out of balance or range, or you might want to speak to these clients because they hold X stock. they can then automatically press a button, email those clients, or arrange a phone call with them. So, that's sort of the first thing that they do when they go in the morning. Where it's heading, though, is really interesting. So they're using the OpenAI engine. They're training it only on Morgan Stanley data, so it can't hallucinate or sort of go off and find weird and wonderful statistics from around the web.
Yeah.
And it'll allow the advisors to effectively ask the engine things like, what's better, BHP or Rio?
Right.
And then rather than having to pull down two different research reports and try and work out what the key drivers are and who's doing well where, it'll do a full analysis and basically say, BHP is a better option based on the following things. So, again, potentially saving the advisor 20 or 30 minutes of analysis almost in real time while they've got the client on the phone. If it's a new client and the client's asking some broader questions, they can then sort of query, okay, how do I open an account for them now? And it'll automatically walk them through the next steps or how a particular process works. So really driving efficiency using the in-house capability and the in-house IP around sort of data and research.
And I think what's exciting about that is it actually frees you up to be more human. Right, that's the best technology. That's what it lets you do, is it lets you be more human, spend more time with them on understanding them and what they want to do and all of that personal stuff, which is fantastic, and the juicy bits, because all the rest is worked out. Whereas, when I think back to some of those meetings I've had years ago when you've got the printed out fact find and you're spending the whole time, it's just horrendous. That's not actually engaging with a client. So all of these things give you more time to do that. And for listeners of the podcast, the Ensombl platform has behind it that we all type in and we chat to each other on and ask questions. It has AI behind it. And so when Ensombl happens to come out with some thought leadership that you feel, wow, that's exactly what I was just thinking about. Well, it's because Ensombl AI is listening and they've pulled it all together and said, this is the things advisors want. How fantastic is that?
And as I always say, the trick is to make sure that you use it in a way that doesn't come across as being creepy.
Right, exactly. It's just insights, it's just actually listening when people talk, as opposed to digging through all sorts of layers of awful stuff, Yeah, it's really fascinating. Is there anything else that you can see sort of coming up that's interesting that you guys might have discovered in any of your similar visits, like your Morgan Stanley one?
So yes, I think you're not going to have a conversation these days, unfortunately, without talking about AI. I think it really is evolving rapidly, and generative AI is incredibly exciting, and it's going to allow us to replace a lot of the processes that can take us hours and hours and hours. And I've got hundreds of stories that I could share with you already, but conscious of our time. So I think let's have a look at how that evolves. SOAs are going to change anyway as a result of QAR. How do we use some of the tools available to streamline that even further? So that's important. I think that digital experience, providing personalised insights, is critical and not that far away. It's got to be hyper-personalised, and to use a saying that I often use is that we can never forget that the service levels that a client expects are based on the last best experience that they had. And inevitably, that will be one of the big tech companies that we all work with, an Amazon or a Facebook, where they do get that hyper-personalisation at any time.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the thing we've got to all watch all the time is applying tech to something that's a crappy process just makes it an even crappier process. Like it's not, and that's why the focus on customer experience is so important. That's where we need to have the energy, where it just makes it easier and even a better communication. I think that's something that I'm really interested in, is how can we get better ways of communicating ideas and concepts in advice and using smart tech to do that, rather than.
Yeah, well, again, if it's ChatGPT, I don't know if you've tried this one, but ask it to describe a transition to retirement strategy to a 5-year-old.
Nice. Oh, well, there's your mission, folks. I feel like that's a fabulous way to finish up. We've all got to go and do that. And we've got to learn from this, right, of how we can communicate better, because that's actually the value we can bring. We can bring that connection with our clients. All right, Advice Explorers, if you'd like to find out more about how Netwealth works with advisors, you can see the link in the episode show notes. You know where to find them. I hope you got some value out of hearing us geek out over all the future technology issues out there, and having two tech geeks on the microphone. Thank you so much for joining us, Matt, and for Netwealth supporting the Ensombl AdviceTech podcast as a sponsor. We really appreciate it.
Great to be back and always enjoy the chat.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Between Meetings. For
For more episodes and to subscribe to our series, visit the Netwealth website, iTunes, Spotify, or your favourite listening service. And if you want to contact me or engage or discuss any of the topics raised, please find me on LinkedIn or Twitter or send me a private message. We hope you can tune into the next episode.